What if you had to be quiet or you'd die? Well, I'd probably die. A Quiet Place Day 1 is a prequel side story in the A Quiet Place series. I personally hate that this series is called A Quiet Place, and I didn't realize that until I was writing this video, mainly because I have to keep saying A Quiet Place over and over again. This is going to be a nearly full spoilers review and discussion of the movie, so if you want to see the movie with virgin ears, I'd skip this until you have. I'd also skip this one if you think you wouldn't like to hear me complain a lot about a movie, because that's going to be a lot of what this review is, honestly. This movie, while being called Day 1, actually takes place during the first 5 or so days of the alien invasion in the A Quiet Place series. If you didn't already know, in this series, a species of incredibly powerful aliens crash land onto Earth and basically end the world by killing everyone. The horror gimmick of the franchise is that you have to be quiet because they have crazy, vibrating ear holes that make them really good at hearing things. The main character of this film is Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o. Sam is living in a hospice facility because she has a form of cancer that is killing her pretty young. It's quite obvious that she doesn't want to be there and isn't happy with her life, which makes sense because I don't think having cancer is the type of thing that would actually improve your outlook on life. But she doesn't have to worry for long because the world ends while they're out on a trip to see a weird little marionette show. The marionette show is one of the few times in the movie that it attempts symbolism by having the marionette fly up and then crash down to the ground, which upsets her because it represents her life being put on hold because she has cancer and is going to die. Sam has a cat named Frodo that also accompanies her throughout the movie, and no, don't worry, it doesn't die. It also doesn't get anyone killed, but it almost does like 3 times. During the trip into the city, the aliens crash land onto Earth, and of course the world begins to end as the aliens go absolutely sicko mode and just trash the place and toss people around. It's great. This is all background to a more personal story featuring our main character, Sam. The main plot of this movie sees Sam really wanting one last slice of pizza.
Pizza time.
And the aliens are her main obstacle. For most of the movie, we don't know why pizza is so important to her, but it's easy enough to just assume that she really likes pizza and wants it as her final meal before the cancer or the aliens kill her. We do find out towards the end of the movie that the place she wants to eat specifically, called Patsy's, is a place her father took her a lot as a kid. Her father was apparently a great guy and a jazz musician, and she had a lot of fond memories with him when she was younger. She also says at one point that he died of the same cancer that she did, and so she now wants to reconnect with the memory of her father one last time before she passes, which is a really sweet through line for the movie. This plot is mostly fun and even kind of emotional at times, if not a bit cliche at different points. On her journey, she meets a man named Eric who is strange. In my original write-up of this movie, I called him kind of a bumbling fool, but his character is just kind of weird. Like, he seems like he just completely lacks common sense. Eric joins Sam after popping out of a flooded train station that nearly drowned him and seeing her cat Frodo. He follows Frodo to Sam and just begins to follow her around. She does try to leave him a couple of times, but they end up deciding to travel together just because. He is scared of dying after almost drowning, which is obviously supposed to put him at odds with Sam, who is actually dying no matter what happens to them. But that's all that Eric kind of has going on. He doesn't want to die and sees that Sam has some type of confidence that he doesn't have, and so he begins to follow her around and decides to help her when he realizes she has cancer. Don't get it twisted though, the movie pretty well implies that Sam doesn't need Eric. If anything, it's more the other way around. They do turn this on their head towards the end of the movie when she is in a lot of pain and needs medication, but that's one moment. Most of the movie she is completely able. These two leads slowly develop a sort of brother-sister relationship throughout the movie, or at least that's the vibe that I got from it. It felt like it could have been romantic a couple of times, but it never veers that far into it. It really does feel more like a sibling bond, which is kind of sweet. There are some moments between them that are cliche, like a moment where they scream during a thunderstorm to get out some of their frustrations, but I only rolled my eyes like once during that whole scene, so it's nothing terrible, it's just nothing new either. The performances of the actors, Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn, actually is one of the highlights of the movie and what made me like it probably more than I would have any other way. Having said that, one of my biggest problems with the movie and the story, besides it being cliche and incredibly cut and dry, is that it doesn't feel like it needed to be done in this setting. I even question if it was an original script that was adapted to be in the A Quiet Place series, because the core character story of Sam and Eric and the broader story about the monsters and the beginning of the so-called invasion are two entirely separate stories that have been welded together. It doesn't really feel like a prequel that needed to be done, besides to make some money on a pretty okay character movie. But we'll get more onto that later. A few other highlights that I found during the movie were the camera work. There are some really pretty shots in the movie that I just enjoyed personally and stick in my head, as well as some of the crazier action scenes in the movie being pretty fun. This is where the nonsense gets knocked up to like 1,000, and so you can kind of get over all the other silly things because aliens are like tossing cars around and people around. But besides that, like I just said, there is a lot of silliness in the movie that doesn't have to do with these scenes, and it kind of throws the movie off. So, this is going to be a long section of me just complaining about the nonsensical nature of different portions of the film. I think they just hoped that people wouldn't think too much about these scenes. As a fan of horror, I know there's a certain suspension of disbelief you're supposed to have, but if a movie is good enough, it's easier to just overlook certain things. This movie has a lot of inconsistencies that, for me personally, pulled me out of the experience many, many times. I'll repeat again that the action sequences are pretty cool. The opening one with the aliens first landing is rad. There's dust everywhere and cars being thrown around and people being just pulled off screen. But then we get two scenes that take place roughly at the beginning of the movie while they're sheltered in the theater that they saw the marionette show at. The first takes place on the roof of the theater. They see a bridge that connects the part of the city they're in to the mainland blown up by the military. One of the people that's on the roof with them begins to try and scream, "We're all gonna die!" out of nowhere, so of course one of the other survivors has to grab him and put their hand over his mouth, but he keeps trying to scream it, even as the guy's telling him, "If you scream, we will die." I'm going to say this a lot, but I get that the guy's supposed to be panicking, but they will literally die if he screams, which just makes this scene really frustrating and stupid to me. Thankfully, the guy holding his mouth breaks his neck to keep him quiet, which is incredibly satisfying. It's meant to act as if this action and moment is like really serious and morally gray and upsetting, but I'm actually glad that he broke the guy's neck. This guy was literally going to scream and get them and almost everyone in that theater killed because something gave him the Screamies. Yes, he saw the bridge exploded, they're trapped on that part of the city, I get it, he's panicking. But if the first thing you think is, oh, the one thing that will get us killed, I'm going to do that, you kind of deserve to die. I don't feel bad for you. I just can't feel bad for you. This happens like 2 other times in the movie. In fact, you can see one of the times it happens in the trailer. You don't know that that's what's happening in the trailer, but it is. There's this scene where a large line of survivors are going down the street to head towards a rescue boat, and the ambient noise that their march makes summons a bunch of the monsters who, of course, attack them. Again, cool scene, the monsters are tossing people around and picking them up and tossing cars and stuff like that. I love it, it's fun. Then, Sam climbs under a car to protect herself. And while hiding under this car for like a few seconds, a guy decides to climb under it with her, grabs her legs, and begins to scream for her to help him. Like, again, I get that he's panicking. It's a bad situation, but Jesus Christ, come on. What is she going to do? A feeble, cancer-stricken woman hiding under a car. It would have made more sense for him to crawl under the car and grab the car itself and just be quiet. Of course, after screaming for a few solid seconds, he gets jerked away by one of the aliens. And the car falls on Sam's leg and almost crushes it. So basically, this guy and the other guy screaming are introduced to create artificial tension and suspense when there is none. If they didn't freak out, nothing bad would have happened. I never believed that our main characters would die in this movie anyway, so it didn't work. This is made only dumber by the fact that this scene already is meant to be tense. There's monsters everywhere, like grabbing people and throwing them. You don't have to have a guy stupidly crawl under a car and grab a woman and scream. You literally could have just had one of the monsters like jump on top of the car or pretend to be sniffing under it or something. More than anything, it made me wonder if these aliens put off some type of sound wave that makes humans go crazy and really want to scream. Also, a few seconds after that car scene, Sam is stumbling through the streets, and again, someone off at the distance is just walking down the middle of the road screaming, and they get grabbed by an alien. There is one rule in this universe, and it's being quiet. One rule. The second moment at the theater that is representative of some of the problems in this movie is when the power goes off and a backup generator kicks on. A male nurse and friend of Sam's who worked at the hospice facility she lived at runs out with her to try and turn the generator off. He has to crawl behind the generator because they very stupidly put the off lever on the back of it facing close to the wall, but he does manage to turn it off. But as he's crawling back out, oh, such bad luck, his shirt gets caught on a sharp part of the generator and rips incredibly loudly. He then looks at Sam and then slowly turns around to see that one of the monsters is in a corner waiting for him, which of course then jumps, grabs him, and carries him off screen to his apparent death. This is one of the silliest deaths in the whole movie because it almost feels as if the monster took a comedic beat before killing him. Like it waits for him to turn around and see it before it jumps forward and grabs him. Not to mention the fact that apparently this loud-ass generator only brought one of the monsters, and then there are other scenes in this movie where people kick a tin can or something or a suitcase falls over and the entire armada of them shows up. This is all the more confusing because I found this same scene in one of the trailers, but it makes a bit more sense. The guy just turns off the generator, but then gets grabbed by one of the monsters off screen again. Still not a great or overly scary scene, but it works better. The generator brought one of the monsters that killed him. Also confusing because the guy in the trailer was the puppeteer who put on the marionette show and not the male nurse. I'm guessing they put the male nurse in as a way to try and ground Sam to the theater, give her a reason not to leave. But then after he dies, she has no reason to stay, so you know what time it is.
Pizza time.
But then killing him just makes it really obvious what they're doing, and the way they kill him, again, is just really stupid. I bring up this moment not just because it plays out in this really overly dramatic, unrealistic way, but also because it lets me hone in on how inconsistent the aliens react to sound in this movie. In the scene I just talked about, a generator brings one alien who kills that one guy and then nothing else happens. Incredibly convenient. But there is another scene, which thankfully they put in the trailer so I can show you, in which a knocked over briefcase summons hundreds of these motherfuckers. Thankfully, the rest of this scene is pretty clever, with them running and breaking things with bricks and making loud noise to distract the monsters as they run off, but this kind of thing just takes me out of it. How can a suitcase bring so many of them when a generator brings one? Not only that, but the male nurse doesn't even get killed because of the generator, it seems. He gets killed because his shirt gets ripped. But there's a scene late into the movie in which Eric literally has one of the monsters right next to his face with its whole head open and its vibrating, grossly wet ear hole pointed directly at his face, and somehow it can't hear him breathing. It's just a little bit too much. It just doesn't add up. Another thing, the movie isn't that scary, if at all. I think this series is marketed as a horror movie series, but if anything, it had a little bit of tension, maybe, but I never really felt like many of the characters were in actual danger, and none of it really made me feel scared. Unless they were a side character or someone who wanted to scream randomly or something, most people didn't seem like they were in actual danger if they were a main character. There are a few jump scares in the movie, but most of them feel completely unearned. The one that sticks out the most to me is in the dead center of the movie, in which they go back to Sam's old apartment. This is also when the cliche thunder screaming scene happens, by the way. Directly after that scene, it suddenly cuts to a shot of her window, and outside New York City looks normal. There are people walking around and cars moving around. It isn't all destroyed. And then suddenly, boom, a monster jumps at the window and crashes into it. That's right, it's the cliche she just had a scary, bad dream jump scare. She wakes up in a cold sweat and that's it. No other mentions of dreams or anything. She literally had a dream to have a jump scare in it because they felt that they hadn't had something scary happen long enough. And even then, it felt so cheap that if anything, I just felt mad about it. It did get me, I won't lie. I jumped a little in my seat, but that's because I was sitting there trying to figure out why it was showing this shot of New York. I was like, is this a flashback or something? And then no, it's a dream jump scare. This does just go back to the idea of them doing whatever they can for tension. A dream jump scare, a guy crawling under a car and screaming. Another great example is when Sam and Eric have to go back into a watery, flooded subway to get to where they're going. It shows a monster, just one, sleeping in the ceiling of this destroyed subway tunnel. They manage to get by it and stay quiet, but then as the water gets deeper, Eric begins to panic. He doesn't want to die, he's scared of water, blah blah blah. He gasps loudly enough over the water apparently, and the monster, which is a good way back at this point, hears him, crawls out, and begins to come after them. There are so many scenes in this movie where they're supposed to be talking over running water, or water that's like loud enough that it covers them, but this one time, he apparently gasps loud enough and it just doesn't work, and the thing that's that back there comes to get them. It's just way too inconsistent. Another few random things that jumped out to me and could be nitpicks is that later in the movie, some of the city looks completely fine, like a ton of untouched cars and buildings. But then when they get to Patsy's, the pizza place they've been trying to get to the whole movie, a semi-truck has just inconveniently blown it up. This legitimately made me laugh out loud. It was the most Resident Evil-ass way they could have put another roadblock in front of their journey, just having a semi-truck crash into it and blow up. But then, in what is supposed to be an emotional scene where she turns around and she's crying because she wanted to go to this one last place and have a piece of pizza from it,
Pizza time.
she falls down in tears in front of a seemingly infinitely spewing sewer fire. This got a legit laugh out loud laugh out of me and the friend I was seeing the movie with, just emotionally crying in front of an open manhole fire after seeing that the pizza place you wanted to go to was blown up by a semi. Also, the aliens themselves. Besides being really inconsistent in actually hearing things, I'm just confused as to what their whole deal is. In an interview with John Krasinski, he apparently said that they come from a crazy planet that turned them into super predators. The Quiet Place Wiki, where I got this information, says that the meteors that land on Earth are pieces of their home planet that got blown up at some point. But how did so many of them just happen to hit Earth all at the same time? There are thousands of these things, apparently. Not to mention, they don't actually kill people to eat them. We do see them eating some kind of weird alien fungus, but that would imply that they brought their own food source with them to this planet. It would actually make sense if they were some type of alien planet-wide parasite going from planet to planet, destroying and converting them, then launching back into space towards another planet as part of their life cycle. Or even easier, they're a weapon made by other aliens to clear off Earth. But we don't really get enough of that to know anything. It just seems like they come to Earth to kill people and then they plant their own food. It's confusing. And no, I don't need to be told explicitly what they're doing. It would just help if we had some ideas that added up and made sense. John Krasinski has said that he wants to make a part 3, so maybe there will be some more information in that makes this all add up, but he didn't really add much in part 2 that could help that, so I don't see many of these questions being answered, but maybe I'm wrong. And finally, the last thing I want to complain about is the ending. I didn't love the way it ended. The lead up to it is pretty solid. There's some really touching, if not cliche, moments between Sam and Eric. They go to the bar that Sam's dad played piano at since the pizza place was blown up. Eric gets them a box of pizza and writes Patsy's on it to, just be like, oh, look, we're actually having Patsy's. Eric also does some magic tricks and makes Sam be his assistant, which explains a lot about how weird his character is. He's a magician, so obviously he's just a weird guy. And then she gives him her sweater, which is yellow and makes him look like Mr. Rogers, which I thought was nice. Finally, we have Sam's valiant sacrifice, which most people probably saw coming from a mile away. She runs off and tries to make a bunch of noise so Eric can take her cat Frodo and himself and go to one of the rescue boats. And it works. The monsters all start coming for her, but unluckily for Eric, he kicks the loudest tin can in the world, and they all start running towards him. Again, artificial tension because of course he makes it into the water before any of the monsters manage to grab him, and he escapes. This moment is kind of silly because he floats in the water for like a solid 10 seconds just looking back at where she should be, but she's so far away that he probably can't see her. Sam was a professional and published poet before she got cancer, by the way, which doesn't actually have much to do with the core of the story, but does have to do with her character. As Eric gets onto the boat and starts to cuddle up with Frodo in safety, he reaches into the pocket of the jacket and finds a poem that Sam wrote for him, which is very sweet, and I like that a lot. What happens after that is what I didn't like. We cut back to Sam, who has survived the attack from the aliens, and is looking at a picture of herself and her father that was in the pizza place. We then cut to a scene of her walking down the street by herself. She plugs her iPod into a speaker, which plays music out loud, and then an alien lands behind her, and that's how the movie ends. I see that this is completely personal preference, but I just don't like the fact that she survives her own sacrifice and then we just have to see an extra scene of her taking her own life. I get what they're trying to do. They wanted her to go out on her own terms, deciding to kill herself, but she kind of did that when she valiantly sacrificed herself to save Eric. So these additional scenes just feel unnecessary. Me personally, it would have made more sense and felt more satisfying if she had died while saving Eric. To be honest though, at the end of the day, the whole movie kind of feels unnecessary. It isn't a bad movie, it entertained me. I didn't regret spending the $7 that I did to see it because it was cheap movie day at our theater. And a lot of people do seem to like it, but it's not anything new. It doesn't feel like this was a story that needed to be told. It's just okay. It isn't particularly scary, it doesn't have a great internal consistency with the horror stuff, the acting of the two leads is pretty good, but the overall story itself is just kind of fine. It's a very human story, which works, but it doesn't explore the nuance of humanity. Every person in it is a good person. No, there are no human bad guys besides the people who get the Screamies. That's it. It's okay. It's straightforward. And like I said, I never really bought into the fact that our two leads were in any actual danger, and the story that was told in what is supposed to be a prequel really didn't feel like it needed to be told. You could have slotted the core story of this into any other apocalyptic movie and it would have worked, and I think a much more interesting story could have been told in the A Quiet Place universe, but it wasn't, and what we got in this movie is okay, and I'm sure a lot of people like it, and it's cool that they liked it. I didn't love it. I thought it was fine. So yeah, that's A Quiet Place Day 1 and my thoughts on it. More like A Quiet Place Day, one more slice of pizza, am I right? Oh. Thanks for watching. This video was just a little experiment. I don't think I've ever reviewed a movie on this channel, so I hope I did alright. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'll do more like this. I want to review some movies I actually really like, some stuff that I see as like classics from my life. This one was just a way to give it a try with a movie that I just thought was okay. And even then, I had a lot of trouble, I kept redoing this video over and over again, and I guess that's just the way I do things. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday. Thanks for letting me haunt your devices for just a little bit, and remember,
Pizza time.